NASA says its Voyager 1 probe, the most distant human-made object in the universe, is sending usable information to Earth again.
Voyager 1 wasn't built to frighten us. It was meant to wander, whispering science from the edge of our sun's reach and then dim into silence. Nearly 5 decades on, it did something no one saw coming. It turned. It hummed. It answered. A faint patterned signal, a slight uncommanded change in direction. Antennas locked on Earth, yet a gaze fixed into space. Is this a dying probe's last glitch, or a reply from the dark? Tonight, we trace the clues from heartbeat to heading and ask the question we were never meant to. Is this first contact, or a final call? A mission built to fade. In September of 1977, Voyager 1 lifted off from Cape Canaveral with little fanfare compared to the Saturn V rockets that had carried astronauts to the moon. It wasn't built to dazzle or to last forever. Its mission profile was modest, a 5-year journey to study Jupiter and Saturn, photograph their moons, and then sail quietly into the outer darkness. Engineers expected the probe to fade away not long after, its instruments silenced by distance and its power dwindling into nothing. But Voyager 1 was built with the same stubbornness that characterizes much of NASA's work. Its power came from radioisotope thermoelectric generators, RTGs, that produced steady electricity from the decay of plutonium. Each year, their output declined slightly, like the dimming of a lantern wick. Still, decade after decade, they gave just enough to keep instruments alive. Systems were gradually powered down, cameras shut off, heaters rationed, but the spacecraft endured. A mission meant for 5 years was still talking nearly half a century later. Late 1980s, Voyager 1 had flown past Saturn and its great moon Titan. With its primary mission accomplished, the probe crossed into uncharted space. It ventured beyond the orbit of Pluto and pressed toward the heliopause, the invisible boundary where the sun's influence yields to the interstellar medium. Crossing that threshold in 2012 was historic. Voyager 1 became the first human-made object to enter interstellar space. It wasn't just another mission milestone, it was humanity itself reaching beyond the solar system for the first time. What made this feat more extraordinary was the trickle of data that had never dried up. Plasma wave detectors, magnetometers, and cosmic rays kept whispering back to Earth. The giant dish antennas of the Deep Space Network strained to catch the faintest signals, each delayed by more than 22 hours in light travel time. The data were not exciting, no pictures anymore, but they painted a picture of the profile of the edge of our sun's bubble, density of charged particles, pressure of galactic cosmic rays, and hum of interstellar plasma. It was information the human race had never had before. Over the years, Voyager 1 managed to transcend the boundaries of being known as merely a spacecraft. It became something of a graveyard for much of Earth's curious inhabitants. Authors called it a ghost ship, silently drifting through the stars. Poets called it the bottled message of Earth, forever riding the cosmic tide. School children learned of the golden record affixed upon its side, a so-called time capsule containing Earth's music and greetings. It felt like with each transmission, another call was sent, farther and farther away, a voice scientists feared might soon be silenced. Engineers, however, knew that the end would not be instantaneous, but would come slowly over time. The RTGs lose a few watts each year. One by one, the instruments flicker out. Finally, the transmitter will stop. Voyager would die not in a crash, but in a fade. Everyone expected that the last chapter would lapse into silence, and the very last drift into deep time, during which the probe, on a course for nowhere, would do so uninterrupted. That was then. But in the 46th year, something happened to those expectations. Voyager did not fade away. It lurched. The signal anomalies, the tiny changes in orientation, and those whispers buried deep in the data countered one long-held assumption that the end would be an unremarkable departure. What was starting to look like a mission on its long march to oblivion now threw up questions that it was never designed to answer, and it all began with a sound, a faint hum in the data that refused to go away. The hum that wouldn't quit. At first, no one at NASA thought twice about it. A faint, low-frequency tone had appeared in the plasma wave instrument data beamed back from Voyager 1. The spacecraft was nearly half a century old. Its instruments had survived far beyond their design life. Glitches, distortions, and even phantom signals were expected. Engineers assumed it was another artifact of aging hardware, a quirk in a probe that had long since outlived its warranty. But this wasn't a quirk. The hum persisted. Transmission after transmission carried the same low sound, steady and unwavering. It wasn't the chaotic static of a faulty instrument. It was rhythmic, patterned, as if something unseen was pressing on the edges of the probe's sensors. When analysts filtered out background noise, the hum grew clearer, pulsing with mathematical precision. Its intervals weren't random. They repeated, they aligned. To make matters stranger, the signal was confirmed across NASA's deep space network. Multiple Earth-based antennas spread across continents caught the same tone. It wasn't interference from a local source. It wasn't a passing satellite or a cosmic burst that flared once and faded. It was real, stable, and locked to Voyager 1. Whatever this hum was, it was coming from, or through, the spacecraft itself. Scientists were cautious. In official reports, they avoided words like message or signal. Instead, the phenomenon was labeled an anomalous frequency event. Behind closed doors, though, the language grew less careful. Some saw it as a natural plasma oscillation, an unknown quirk of the interstellar medium. Others noticed something unsettling. The hum's structure resembled harmonic intervals found in music, ratios tied to mathematics rather than random physics. When graphed, the pattern displayed symmetry, like a waveform, crafted rather than stumbled upon. There was a discreet consultation by cryptographers and linguists. Off the record, a few admitted on the signal bore resemblance to binary code, even mirroring some early human attempts at interstellar communication, like the Arecibo message, not identical, close enough to raise eyebrows. Would something be echoing back our own methods for easy comprehension at the hands of our present minds? The hum quickly became headlines. Skeptics say that the instruments of Voyager, which have been constantly damaged by cosmic radiation for decades, are prone to giving false whistling harmonics, strike a range of sensitive electronics by cosmic rays, and the very result will be an order mimicking an illusion. But believers say, here is a point that will not lend itself to much skeptical explanation. Consistency. No glitch appears in absolute periodicity across weeks and months. Random failures do not encode Fibonacci sequences or prime number spacing. As the argument raged, a disturbing fact loomed behind the scenes, that the hum had begun days before Voyager turned its back on deep space. A spacecraft that had heard no commands, with no cameras working, made the most minute, even imperceptible adjustment to its path, as though turning to face the source of the tone, too close to call. If the hum was just another case of interference, one might consider the turn an odd coincidence. Here, however, this strange display seemed much more like cause and effect. For years, Voyager had been mankind's voice in the wilderness, delivering data in silence. Suddenly, it looked like something had whispered back to them, and the spacecraft had been listening. And then came the moment no one at NASA could dismiss. Voyager 1 turned, not toward a star or planet, but toward an empty patch of space. The turn toward nothing. Voyager 1 drifts more than 15 billion miles from Earth. At that distance, its signals take over 22 hours just to reach home. Every adjustment, every thruster fire must be carefully commanded and logged, because nothing on the spacecraft is supposed to happen on its own. So, when Voyager's trajectory shifted without any command in its queue, alarms rippled through the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. This wasn't a noisy data spike. It was a clean, deliberate reorientation, as if the probe had decided to look somewhere else. The adjustment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a cinematic turn of the entire spacecraft. But in deep space, even a fraction of a degree matters. A tiny shift now means hundreds of millions of miles of difference later. Engineers scoured the logs. No residual commands were pending. No automated fallback code matched the move. The old thrusters, dormant for decades, seemed to have fired with surgical precision. The spacecraft had changed direction, and nobody on Earth had told it to. What made the anomaly stranger was the destination. Voyager's antenna and instruments weren't pointing toward a known star or a visible object. They were now locked on an empty patch of sky. No planets, no galaxies, not even a faint stellar cluster to justify the change. The region was void, at least to every telescope aimed that way. Why would a spacecraft, half dead and clinging to its last watts of power, decide to face nothing? The speculation began immediately. The simplest explanations pointed to physics, which meant outgassing of ancient fuel lines, torque from thermal stress, or cosmic radiation flipping bits in the spacecraft's ancient computers. Each was possible, but none of them fit perfectly. Outgassing would be random, not pinpointed. It was radiation glitches that caused errors and not course corrections measured in fractions of a degree. Even the idea of corrupted code fragments seemed flimsy, as Voyager systems had been stable over the years without causing anything like this. Further afield, tradition suggested a more disturbing connection. Just days ago, Voyager had begun to transmit a somewhat strange, low-frequency hum, structured, patterned, and eerily deliberate. Now, the spacecraft moved, pointing itself as if it were directing toward the sound. Could it be that the sound had actually caused the shift? Was Voyager acting not according to the commands of Earth, but to something other? Engineers considered the scenario. Would the probe's ancient logic systems be able to respond automatically to certain data patterns? Could noise in the telemetry make it think it received a command? No, nothing of the sort matched. Nothing in Voyager's design would allow it to translate an anomalous hum into thruster action. Yet here it sat, aligned in a direction that made no sense to human logic, but seemed purposeful all the same. Then again, there was the ghostly detail. Voyager's long inactivated camera array, turned off in 1990 to conserve power, was now directed right towards the void. It hadn't been reactivated. The direction was unmistakable, though. The probe was looking where it had no place to look at all. For many, it was a coincidence. For some, though, it was the first concrete evidence that something unseen had taken note of the spacecraft and nudged it just that much. Whatever the cause may be, one thing is certain. Voyager has somehow changed its role from passive observer into active participant and got involved in an exchange no one planned. And if the turn raised eyebrows, what came next froze blood. The signals began to change, carrying patterns that looked less like noise and more like intelligence. Patterns that look alive. Once Voyager 1 shifted course, engineers expected its transmissions to degrade in the usual way, slower, weaker, fuzzier with distance. Instead, what arrived stunned even the skeptics. Hidden inside the familiar telemetry were distortions that weren't chaotic at all. They repeated, they mirrored, they carried a structure that looked eerily deliberate, as if the static itself had been rearranged into code. At first, it looked like ordinary signal degradation. After all, Voyager's transmitter was running on dwindling power, and every year the spacecraft fought harder to shout across the abyss. But deeper analysis revealed something extraordinary. The noise wasn't random. It contained sequences that lined up with prime numbers and Fibonacci ratios, mathematical fingerprints of order. Glitches don't follow math. Nature rarely does either. Intelligence does. Cryptographers pored over the data. Patterns appeared in binary-like sequences, timed modulations that echoed logic. Harmonic structures hinted at musical intervals, like tones hidden in a symphony of static. Linguists were brought in, searching for rhythm, syntax, anything resembling language. Some dismissed it as a coincidence. Others couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than an accident. Then came the discovery that unsettled even hardened skeptics, echoes of the golden record. Within the signal, analysts noticed waveforms resembling warped fragments of the record's contents, bits of music, snatches of greetings, even elements of the pulsar map that pinpointed Earth's location. Not exact copies, but transformed, altered, as though reflected through some cosmic mirror. It was as if the record's message, launched in 1977 as a symbolic gesture to the unknown, had been received and was now being referenced in return. Skeptics promoted natural causes. Can plasma interactions in interstellar space shape the signals in this way? Could gravitational lensing twist transmissions into mirrored patterns? Maybe Voyager's malfunctioning hardware looped chunks of its own stored data. But none of these explanations account for the precision. None explained why ratios were matching mathematical constants, or why there were echoes of human-designed content appearing in the modulations. Random noise does not quote a record. With each analysis, the implications became heavier. If the patterns were executed intentionally, then Voyager 1 had now become more than just a probe. It had become a bridge that carried not only our message out there, but also a reply back in. This was not a straightforward hello in plain English, but rather a subtler and stranger form of contact. Mathematics, resonance, reflection. This is exactly the kind of language one would expect from an intelligence quite outside a human context. Inside NASA, words were carefully crafted. Outside, it remained an anomalous signal. Privately, some began to whisper the unthinkable. Contact, not the dramatic, cinematic presentation of alien voices over speakers, but rather a conversation of ratios and rhythms, logic whispered in numbers. As weeks passed, the patterns grew more refined, as though evolving. Distortions became recursive, fractal-like, building complexity on each pass. The sensing moved into something deeper, no longer felt as a probe sending lonely data into silence. It felt as though an exchange could be made, where Earth was no longer the only speaker. And just as scientists argued about how to characterize the signals received, here came another twist from Voyager. It didn't just carry signals, rather, it fluctuated in its strength, and sometimes even in its timing, as if boosted or somehow guided, which forced a terrifying question. Was this Voyager's first handshake with the unknown, or its last desperate call before being taken over entirely? First contact or final call? By the time Voyager 1's signals began carrying recursive patterns and its course shifted toward the void, the debate had fractured into two camps. For some, this was the long-anticipated moment of first contact, a reply to the golden record, confirmation that intelligence exists out there and had noticed us. For others, it was the tragic beginning of the end, a half-century-old spacecraft failing in ways we barely understood, its anomalies mistaken for meaning by desperate humans hungry for wonder. The skeptic's case was simple. Voyager is ancient. Its hardware has endured cosmic radiation for decades, each particle strike capable of flipping bits and corrupting code. Its thrusters, never meant to last this long, could misfire from residue, producing subtle shifts in orientation. Its transmitter, straining on minimal power, could distort signals into apparent rhythms. In this reading, the hum, the turn, the patterns, everything, were coincidences, artifacts of entropy disguised as intelligence. To them, it wasn't first contact. It was Voyager's final call, a mechanical ghost rattling in its last moments. But the opposing view was harder to ignore. Random malfunctions don't produce prime numbers or Fibonacci sequences. They don't echo fragments of the golden record. They don't sustain harmonics for weeks, then evolve them into fractal-like complexity. Nor do they cause a spacecraft to pivot with clean precision toward empty sky. Those who dared to whisper contact argued that the sum of the anomalies told a story of intent. Something had heard us, something had replied, and something might even be guiding Voyager now. This tension existed behind the veil of secrecy in NASA. Publicly issued updates became shorter and colder, deliberately avoiding signals and course changes. The official line announces that anomalous data are under review. Linguists, cryptologists, and astrophysicists pored over every transmission behind closed doors. Increasingly urgent meetings were convened to recall former mission engineers to look at code virtually no one had touched in decades. NASA couldn't announce first contact without definitive proof. If there were no first contact, an announcement would risk inciting hysterics. Operation Voyager proceeded all the while. The distortion pattern became more structured, and the distortions of human speech would appear to be struggling for articulation. Some scientists claimed to see emerging syntax, pauses, rhythms, and logical branching. Others warned that it was an instance of humans imposing their own patterning upon something where none exists. But then, the shift occurred when the signal delay from the spacecraft decreased by a few milliseconds, something that could only result from some external influence. Either the transmission was being boosted, or Voyager was no longer where the Earth thought it was. The perplexing realization of that possibility was the chance of it returning instead of just drifting away. The probe might be turning back. Calculations drew attention to an inward nudge, possibly toward the solar system. If accurate, it ceased to be a ghost ship and instead transformed into a messenger returning home. And whether under natural dynamical reasons or otherwise, it still meant the same thing. Voyager was not going to fade quietly. Voyager's journey was being fully expressed. So which is it? A dying spacecraft mistaking noise for signal, or humanity's first, tenuous outreach toward intelligent life beyond Earth? Either way, the answer may not come quickly. The voice of Voyager 1 is dimmer with each passing year, but that will not stop those listening from dissecting every beat and every silence for clues. First contact or last call, Voyager has already rewritten the script. Space no longer seems silent, and that may be the scariest finding of all. Voyager 1 was supposed to drift and dim. Instead, it hummed, turned, and sent us a riddle. Is this contact, or the poetry of a machine at the edge of time? Tell us where you land and why. Like, comment, and subscribe, and watch the next video on your screen as we follow the signal and the fear into the dark.